I recorded this rather lighthearted look at the history of project management at the Project Management Institute Malaysia Symposium 2016 in October in Kuala Lumpur. I hope you like it. It's a little bit long, so I've split it into two parts.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to Mr. Bob Nicholson.
They say that speakers are supposed to sort of run up, bound onto the stage. I tried that once, it fell flat on my face. But what I'm going to talk about this afternoon, I'm going to trace the evolution of project management, sort of from the myths of ancient history through to the present time and beyond. In fact, I'm going to challenge you at the end to think about where we need to take project management, what we need to think about. Some people might say that project management is the world's oldest profession, probably because of some of the things that we often are called upon to do. But certainly mankind has been undertaking projects since the dawn of civilization. Actually, project management is even mentioned in the Bible. It is. It says, but don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and then everyone would laugh at you. So let's start off and look at Sumeria, ancient Sumeria. There was about a dozen independent city-states, mostly demarcated by canals and boundary stones. Now, they must have had project managers, although they're never written about, because you really can't build cities and canals and all of that without some form of project management. But I don't think they called it that, and they certainly didn't have the PMIMY guy to help them. But they still managed to build cities. They had temple scribes who drafted the plans, managed the construction, also ran the government. And in Mesopotamia, the craft of building was regarded as a divine gift taught to men by the gods. And of course, these days there are probably a lot of project managers who consider themselves God's gift to the world. This is an example of an ancient Sumerian project progress report. They actually invented writing so that they could develop progress reports. Very similar to what we have today. Moving forward, we can look at Stonehenge. Now, Stonehenge was not just one project, you could call it a program. Construction was phased, probably over about 1,500 years. Now, I've worked on a few projects that went on for a long time, but nothing quite that long. Some interesting things that have been found. This is the original artist rendering from 3000 BCE, and the original computer-generated drawing, also from 3000 BCE. Yes, they were actually quite advanced at that time. Moving a little bit more forward, we can go to Egypt. This was one of the first pyramids ever built, the step pyramid, the pyramid of Zoser. The problems we face today as project managers, I'm sure were encountered by the Egyptians. This pyramid was commissioned by King Zoser of the 3rd dynasty. He was the sponsor. And his minister, Amenhotep, was the project manager. Actually, there's quite an interesting story about that in a book called Ancient Engineers by a writer called L. Sprague de Camp. And he says, although no details of the lives of Zoser and Amenhotep have come down, we can be sure that they were able men who worked effectively together. Such was his repute as a physician, architect, writer, statesman, and all-round sage that in later times collections of wise sayings circulated under the name of Amenhotep. In this manner, the reputation of the project manager was perhaps first born, being a jack of all trades. Zoser and Amenhotep built one of unusual size and shape, first being square rather than oblong, and over 200 feet on each side and 26 feet high. Well, wait a minute, that's not what we're seeing here. Because not being satisfied with that, Zoser and Amenhotep enlarged this twice by adding stones to the side. And before the second of these enlargements was completed, the king changed his mind again, decided not only to enlarge the structure still further, but also to make it like a giant stepped layer cake or pyramid, resembling 4 square mastabas in decreasing size, piled one on top of another, much like the birthday cake we had yesterday, but not round. And it finally ended up as a step pyramid of 6 sides, 200 feet high and a base of 358 by 411 feet, so they kind of didn't make it square. I mean, with a sponsor like Zoser and a clearly evident creeping scope during the project implementation, one must have imagined that Amenhotep, given his glowing reputation, was well versed in the principles of scope change management. On the other hand, Amenhotep didn't likely have any of the current day troubles that we have of gaining and retaining team commitment. For those who failed to perform, he would just have them summarily executed. An authority that project managers today perhaps would like to have, but only dream about. Here's an example of an Egyptian project status report. All right, let's move around the globe, okay? So let's go to China. During the Qin Dynasty, the Great Wall of China was built. A large project even by today's standards. According to historical data, the labor force was organized into 3 groups: soldiers, common people, and criminals. I've worked on some projects where it seemed from the claims they submitted, some of the contractors were in the labor class. The emperor ordered millions of people to finish this project. They had no constraints on resources. Of course, these days, millions of people go to walk on the wall. Hey, anybody ever been to the Great Wall of China? Don't go on a Chinese public holiday, for sure. All right, let's move a little further and move back around the other side of the globe. Vitruvius, sort of the godfather, actually, of early architects, and also a project manager, but in Roman times, they were called engineers. His book, actually his book was 10 volumes. And he said that a structure must exhibit 3 qualities: that it must be solid, useful, and beautiful, or as I learned, in firmness, commodity, and delight. In Roman times, architecture was a broader subject than at present, and included, in addition to architecture, the modern fields of construction management, construction engineering, chemical engineering, civil engineering, material engineering, mechanical engineering, military engineering, and urban planning. Anyone for some more knowledge areas? You've probably all seen this famous drawing by Leonardo da Vinci. This is based on the work of Vitruvius. It's called the Vitruvian Man, the actual name of this piece, and it's based on the proportions that were written about by Vitruvius. The Romans also gave us milestones. They were used, as they are today, to mark the progress of work. Actually, modern project management, and of course even for the Romans, all came out of military weapons acquisition programs. The Romans put milestones along the road so that they could measure the progress of the army. The Roman army had to travel at a set pace, right? 5,000 steps to a Roman mile, traveling at 4 miles an hour. You can't imagine the whole cohort marching on 3,962, 3,963, 3,964. Oh crap, 1, 2. So they put milestones along the road. right? And then the legions would only just have to march along, much like army boys do today, singing dirty songs in Latin. Now they sing them in Hokkien, right? And then the scribe had a sand dial and he would turn it. They knew how to place the stones because they knew pi. They learned that from the Egyptians. They had a big wheel on the back of a chariot with a clicker, and they'd measure the mile, and when they got to the mile, they'd plant the stone. We still use milestones today, both on the highways and, of course, on our projects to help us measure project progress. Moving forward again, let's go into the medieval times, right? Move forward about 1,000 years from the Romans. Many beautiful cathedrals built in Europe. This is the Cathedral of Chartres, and it was mostly built between 1194 and 1250. I've seen projects with that much speed. It was estimated that about 300 men were working on the site at any one time. Not as many as compared to, say, working on the Great Wall of China, but still, for medieval France, an impressive number of people to bring together. And they had to be managed. It was largely built actually by mobile teams of masons that would move around from the countryside, from job to job, working for as long as the money lasted. When the funds ran out, they would leave the site altogether, crews still intact, find another project. Maybe the sponsors forgot to read their Bibles. Medieval cathedrals were in fact not designed by architects. The profession as we know it today really didn't exist yet, or even by a series of architects, but by a succession of masons or building contractors. These men were in fact what we would call master masons, thoroughly trained in the aspects of their craft, and they acted as both architects, project managers, and main contractors all rolled into one, sort of the original design and build situation. All right, let's move forward, I don't know, another couple of hundred years. Early as 1425 in England, they started making improvements to the waterways. A great deal of effort went into these projects, and this was the forefront of engineering in its day. Moving forward, now we're really getting into the heart of the Industrial Revolution. One of the earliest, not the earliest, but one of the very earliest railroad lines was the Great Western Railway. This was originally started in 1833, and the first trains ran in 1838. It was expanded a number of times also. The engineer and also project manager, or probably program manager, was a guy called Isambard Kingdom Brunel, very famous if you study the history of engineering. Brunel was actually only 29 at the time when the railroad was done. It was certainly his largest contract to that date. Not all of Brunel's projects were successful, but they were always very innovative. He actually assisted in building the first tunnel under a navigable river, built and launched the SS Great Britain, which was the first propeller-driven ocean-going iron-hulled ship. It didn't run for very long because of economic issues. I guess they didn't do a good life cycle study. In those days, of course, they didn't know about project management to do cost and use or total cost of ownership. This is one of the cuttings on the Great Western Railway. This particular cutting at Soning was over a mile long, up to 60 feet high in places, and it was all hand dug, and the spoil removed by wheelbarrows and horse carts. Right? So you can imagine the logistics of moving this stuff. Let's move on to probably one of the most successful engineering projects of all time, and that's the Eiffel Tower, or in French we say Eiffel. It is the tallest building still by law in the precinct of Paris. It was built as the entrance arch to the 1889 World's Fair. The permit that Eiffel got was for a tower to stand for 20 years. It should have been dismantled in 1909. That was actually one of the requirements in the competition that he won, that it would be able to be dismounted or dismantled within 20 years. And he was responsible for the design, construction, financing, and maintenance during the exhibition and the 20-year period. In return, his contract stipulated he would get 1.5 million French francs, as well as, and this is the best part for him, all the income derived from the commercial use of the tower for a period of 20 years. By the way, what material? Anybody want to guess what material this is built out of? Steel, right? Wrong. Cast iron. Steel was not a construction material at this point in time because it hadn't been tested and developed. Cast iron was used. A lot of innovation in its construction. They had to build these four corner posts separately and get them aligned perfectly level. He used some fantastic, I won't go into the details, but some fantastic engineering. You can see some of the temporary supports. This was also either cast iron or timber. He was very clever. Why is the Eiffel Tower still standing after over almost 120 years now? But what he did, he made a deal because he had the rights to sell entrances, but he also dealt with the newly emerging telecommunications companies, Marconi, to put their radio masts at the top, since it was the tallest structure around. Right? All the radio broadcasting companies wanted to put their radio masts up there. So when 1909 came around and he handed it back to the city of Paris, all these companies said, no, don't tear it down. We want to still use it for broadcasting. So the city of Paris took it back, and now they collect the revenue. It's a fantastic building, fantastic. All of the parts, right, all of the pieces were prefabricated in his workshops. I can't remember how many thousands of pieces there are, all cast iron, all prefabricated in his workshops, all brought to the site and riveted, not bolted, riveted, hot rivets, connecting them all together. Still standing, amazing structure. Let's go to 1896. What does this look like? Gantt chart, right? It's not. It's a harmonograph. Invented and developed by Karol Adamski. Since he was, I believe he was Polish, he only published this in Polish and Russian. So nobody in the West got to hear about it. And of course we all later heard about Henry Gantt's famous charts. Actually, Gantt's charts didn't even look like this. Gantt's early charts were more for manufacturing processes than Adamski's. He published papers before Frederick Winslow Taylor popularized the idea of scientific management, which is one of the roots of a really modern project management. But again, because he only published in Polish and Russian, nobody else got to read about it. He developed what he called the law of harmony for management, comprising of three parts: harmony of choice, that all production tools should be mutually compatible with special regard to their output speed, output of production speed; the harmony of doing, the importance of time coordination, schedules and timetables. So that's why this is called a harmony graph. And the harmony of spirit, right? The importance of creating a good team. This guy was writing in, remember, 1898. He was writing about these things. Over 100 years ago.